Welcome to Momentum Mode. This is Corey Farringle here.
Mike Shannon.
Hey, Mike. All right, and we're on our second episode of video. So it allows us to bring more people in, get more more information out to the listeners. And today we're really happy to be joined by Tom Alexander, the CEO and co-founder of Holistic. And Tom, let's just start with, how old is Holistic?
Holistic we just had our 7.5 birthday.
Holy crap, I didn't realize it was 7.5 already. All right. I actually thought you were going to say 3 or 4, but then again, I was working with you 5 years ago now that I'm thinking about it. So yeah, of course.
Yeah, it's one of those things, and I'm sure that this will resonate with both of you as well as many of the people who are listening, where you're like, how has it possibly been that long? And also, I thought we were just having our 1,000th birthday.
Right. Yeah, we're not talking the aging. So why don't you describe for everybody what Holistic is all about?
Yeah, actually, real quick, funny story about the age of the company. Sometimes when like somebody on our team prepares a deck for me, they'll put in a slide at the front with my headshot, but my headshot was taken like when we started the company and it hasn't been updated yet. And I'm like standing next to it. I'm like, this is what entrepreneurship does to you in 7 years. Like the difference between that person and what you see in front of you is 7 years of a startup. Holistic, we founded it in 2018, and the idea behind it was to measure work, to help companies and business leaders have a better understanding of the workplace and specifically the employee experience within that workplace. And so the problem we were trying to solve essentially is that pretty much everybody we talked to said that people were the most important element of their business, and they're not wrong. That is actually the right answer to the question.
Yep.
And then you start to talk to them about what they're doing for their people, and it became very, very nebulous. And our determination was that folks didn't have the tools, they didn't have the language, they didn't have the resources to do it. So that's what we do, is we build tools to help organizations measure their workplace and make kind of targeted, impactful, action-oriented, proactive efforts to improve employee experience. So we consider ourselves a B2B2C company in the sense that our clients are the companies, but their people are our customers. And we're essentially working with and through our partners to improve the employee experiences of the folks who are working at their company to everybody's benefit.
It's an interesting spot. Before we dig more into that, I want to go back to the origin story in the sense of, what were you doing before the company and what made you decide that this was the space? Because this, a lot of people wake up and say, I'm going to build this product, or I'm going to get, I'm going to, sell this to a consumer. This is a unique, business. Where were you and what led you here?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I think everybody thinks their thing is unique.
That's fair.
I mean, and that's actually kind of an important part of like the entrepreneurial conceit / dysfunction, is that you have to be told that. Like, and Mike, this goes to the origin story. I met Mike because I was the chief operating officer of 1871 before launching Holistic. And for those who don't know, 1871 was this magnificent incubator in Chicago, and we had 500 startups and 2,000 people a day coming through the facility.
That's
and
awesome.
You got to like bathe myself in entrepreneurship for years, and it was very exciting. But part of it was that, the folks were just convinced that their idea was everything.
Yeah.
And you're like, it's up for you to judge if it is or not. And sometimes I look at it and be like, well, you're just, kind of selling a different type of cat food to a different type of cat owner. I'm not sure that I see what you see, but there's something very alluring about that person who comes in and they're pitching you their idea and they think it's just, nobody's ever thought about this and it's going to change the world. And that's very exciting.
Well, and just to interject, Tom, because we knew each other, I was a founder at 1871. And from the vantage point of the founders, Tom Alexander was this interesting guy that suddenly comes in with Howard Tolman when he was CEO, and you were from the governor's office. You did work with University of Chicago. Now he's COO of 1871. Like, when we were sort of in our heyday of, like you said, there's 500 people in there every day. And you were, as I saw it, sort of the right hand with Howard Tolman, who's been a previous guest with Momentum Mode, and I think took 1871 to its like next level. So it's interesting even that you came into that COO of 1871 role out of governor's office in the University of Chicago, and then you continued the path into launching a company. So bringing just piecing that whole picture together for the audience,
Yeah,
you're an unlikely
it
startup
does seem
founder.
a little random, I think, sometimes to
And
people.
just from the outside in, it's like, okay, this guy's going to one day, I don't know, run for mayor or governor or something, but you end up as a startup founder. And so I think that's at the root of Corey's
Yeah.
question. Like, this is an
Yeah,
interesting
yeah, yeah.
origin story from a
So
founder
three
level.
things, right? Three motivations. First of all, it wasn't as random as it seemed from the outside. There was a
Mhm.
theme to what I was doing, which was I was very interested in the impacts of how systems affected, kind of culture and environments. Working at the University of Chicago is kind of where I first learned about some of these concepts in the mayor's office, in the Emanuel administration. Obviously, you're spending an enormous amount of time thinking about, kind of how things affect people. And then when I went to 1871, that was a big part of my role there was like, could we intentionally build the sort of culture and environment that we were hoping to by taking, proactive, concerted actions to try and build this kind of community? And that worked amazingly well. So that was kind of part A, was like this theme kept going, and I was kind of like, couldn't we apply this stuff to the private sector?
Mhm.
What were
Part
some
B
of the
was,
actions that were, just to make something about that tangible, actions that led to the environment you wanted, as an example, were what?
yeah, so I'll give you two. Um, there's an organization in Chicago called Skills for Chicagoland's Future, and they help and underemployed Chicagoans find work. It's an amazing organization. Everybody should look it up. I think it's skillsforchicagolandsfuture.org. And we developed a program through which we would essentially take one candidate for every job we were hiring for the 1871 team. We would take one candidate that Skills for Chicagoland's Future would source and choose and move them into the final pool. Okay. And by the way, 93% of the people that Skills works with are
Mhm.
Black or Hispanic people. And that's just very much a reflection on kind of the nature of unemployment and the environment in Chicago. And we ended up hiring 7 people from that program. And I think a handful of them still work at 1871, like 10 years later.
Hmm.
This was a concerted effort to build a thoughtful approach to hiring, that was going to allow you to have a more representative population that was meant to serve this broader population that was supposed to be representative of the city that we live in and the world that we live in, and et cetera, et cetera. So, that program worked really well, and I thought was a great example of something that you could do proactively to create the sort of environment that you wanted. Similarly, with our events, um, we went to great effort to be really thoughtful about, um, what we now would call diversity, in every regard, though, not just in terms of representative physical diversity, but in terms of the type of events and the nature of the content and the way that we were using the space and the interaction with people. And I think my last year at 1871, we did something like 1,200 or 1,300 events of different shapes and sizes in the
It's
facility.
crazy.
Some of them were like an 8-person meeting, and some of them were a 500-person. We
Right.
have the president of whatever country come in and do it. But I met Marco Rubio and Rand Paul and Damon John in
It's
1871, and David Schwimmer also. So like,
that's bizarre.
that's
Yeah, that's
that's like the
bizarre.
beginning of a joke,
Where's Ashton Kutcher? Yeah, I mean, come on, you got
right? That's so that second part of it was this idea that you could take these very intentional actions and create the sort of community, that you wanted. That was pretty cool. And
Yep.
the third part of it was that entrepreneurship seemed like a hell of a lot of fun, watching it from my vantage point at 1871. Like
Okay,
I was
so
watching.
it's 7 years of perspective. Is it still a hell of a lot of fun?
It is in
Entrepreneurship?
some ways, and in some ways, it's very much not. And I was really, I think, kind of naive and maybe even a little ego driven when I did it because I was like, I've been doing this for 4 years. I've been at the right hand of Howard Tolman, who
Is
is a genius as it
Yeah.
relates to entrepreneurship and had such a huge, and does to this day have a huge impact on the way I think about this stuff. But I was conceited because I was like, I've seen a lot of people make these mistakes, so I won't make them.
I got it. I know what I'm
Total
gonna do.
bullshit.
Yeah.
And the second part of it was that somehow, because I'd like watched entrepreneurs, the waves of entrepreneurship would be a little smoother for me. I'd be a little bit more even keeled. Dead wrong. First of all, I made a ton of the mistakes that I saw people make. And as I was making them, I was like, dude, you're making a mistake that you've scolded people for making, but like you couldn't stop yourself. And secondly, whereas I thought it would be like a muted experience, it's the opposite. I would actually equate it to a scientist who decides to go and live in his petri dish, and it's maddening. So, like for me and for holistic entrepreneurship, is this very volatile, very intense experience. Even now, even 7.5 years into it, it's like brutally exciting and brutally painful, sometimes in the course of an hour. And I sometimes I say like it's like being on a life raft in the ocean. Like even when it's sunny, it's terrifying. So, it's been a pretty interesting experience to be sure.
What's the biggest surprise for you as an entrepreneur? Like you're like, to your point, I saw all this stuff. I saw these people. What's one thing you're like, man, I didn't expect this.
How challenging it is to not take it personally.
Oh,
Like
interesting.
it's not personal. You tell yourself that it's not personal. But at least me, like I find it debilitating, soul crushing when somebody has a bad thing to say about holistic or a bad experience with holistic or something doesn't work out or we'll pitch a client and I'll think the thing went well. And I was actually talking with my wife about this because she's doing some business development stuff. And she was saying, now that I've like done the pitch, I like really want to, I want to get the business. I'm like, yeah, you convince yourself that you're the solution, right?
Right.
And when it doesn't work out, it's tough. And I thought I would kind of develop a little bit of a thicker skin, and I've kind of gotten to that point a little bit. But if I'm being totally candid, like I can still be pretty ravaged by what happens at Holistic on a pretty regular basis. What I tell my team is that the aspiration is like losing $20. You lose a $20 bill, it sucks. You're pissed. I don't care how rich you are. Like $20 is enough that people are maybe certain people, but I'm definitely like if I lose 20, I'm gonna be mad, right? But at the end of the day, if somebody says, what was the big thing that happened today? You still have a chance of that not being the big moment. You
Right.
might have maybe not totally forgotten about it, but it's definitely not the story of the day. So only bad things that happen in startups, and 95% of startup life is bad stuff. I think. Gary Vee says some really good stuff about this, about how entrepreneurship is just a constant disappointment followed by the occasional success to keep you going. And I think that's right. The bad stuff, you can't let it completely overwhelm you. Otherwise, you'll never get anything done. But it's challenging. I mean, it's surprisingly challenging.
Mike, did you
Tom,
find the
let me
same thing
ask.
Oh, go ahead.
Well, so here's what's going through my mind. And we're going to dive in a little bit more to what holistic does, but you described basically the programmatic actions that can then result in an environment that you wanted to have, which we were talking about 1871. And so these are sort of in the heyday, pre-COVID, everybody in person days of one of the most electric cultures where you might have Damon John walking in the door one day. You might have, a former president walking in the door one day. And so you have this electric environment. Now what you're doing is you're helping companies sort of programmatically achieve a certain environment or culture. And now we've sort of passed this heyday point, right? We've gone through COVID, teams have gone either remote or hybrid. I'm kind of going to relate it because we're all in Chicago to, you had the Chicago Bulls in the 90s Jordan days, and it's like we had the most electric environment. But now remove a very foundational part of that environment, which is like with the Bulls, right? Was the Jordan and the team and being the 90s. Now you remove that companies can take for granted that everybody's in person and that there's some electricity around it. So what today are those programmatic actions that are resulting in the environment your clients are trying to achieve?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think the workplace has evolved a lot. I say we've been doing holistic for the 7.5 most interesting years of work, and that's indisputably true.
Yeah.
But it's going to actually be beat by the next 7.5 years and the 7.5 years after that.
The AI
So,
incursion. Yeah.
and yeah, everything, right? I mean, that's the world we live in. And so, we're looking to this very uncertain future with tremendous interest. I think that to answer your question, Mike, what people care about is evolving rapidly as it relates to the employee experience. And so what people cared about in 2015 in some ways was much more clear and much more straightforward, right? They cared about their compensation, they cared about their title, they hoped that they had a nice physical environment to work in. It's much more complex now and it's much more rapidly changing. Sometimes a person's, we call it their pie chart, right? What do you care about? Sometimes their pie chart changes 3 to 4 times in a day. And the organization is kind of trying to meet their needs in an environment where they're ever more reliant on their people. And so the first thing that we're really kind of focused on is understanding what are the motivations of the modern employee. And I'll give you an example. The the two things. So one is the external impact of the work is more important to the modern employee than ever, and it doesn't matter where you work. So like we work with a lot of nonprofits, and nonprofits have this real challenge right now, which is like 10 or 15 years ago, they paid people less. But they're like, yeah, but you're going to make the world a better place. So
Mhm.
come work here. Now you could be working for Acme Polluters and Plutonium Enrichers Incorporated, and you're going to your boss being like, hey, how are we making the world a better place? And your boss has an answer to that question. They're prepared for it because they know that that's your expectation, right? You can go pick a company. I'm not going to say the name of a company, but there are companies that we probably each one of us individually think aren't necessarily making the world a better place. Go on their website and you will
Oh yeah.
find statements about how they're making the world a better place
There's a
by
great
selling
line
their
in the back in our heyday of startups, right? Everybody was watching the TV show Silicon Valley on HBO, and I
yeah.
remember this line where the one of the big characters stands up and he's all upset and he says, "I don't want to live in a world where somebody's making the world a better place." Better than we are. And so it goes to your point of like no matter what anybody's doing, we're making a better place by doing whatever random thing. So how do you
Yeah.
cut through the noise of that?
Yeah, right. Well, first of all, is understanding that these employees are looking for that as a tangible benefit of what they're trying to do at work. And that it's the obligation of the organization not just to sincerely be trying to pursue that, but to have a really thoughtful strategy about how you're going to communicate that to the employees. And this is the second part of it is how you're going to bring them in on that mission. So another thing that's grown tremendously is this desire on the part of the modern employee to feel like their work is impactful to the company's success. That's actually a very good thing because one of the problems that we got into in the last few years was that there was a lot of situations where people were working really hard, but it wasn't necessarily clear that it was going to help the underlying business objectives of the organization. And anybody who's been in business for 5 seconds knows that it's dollars and cents at the end of the day, and that's not necessarily a bad thing.
Right.
Like you got to be successful with your business mission before you can deal with anything else. And so this evolution that's happened, and some of it is related to DEI. Did you hear that phone call come in?
We did. That's all right.
Yeah, was that Rahm Emanuel? You can pick it up
Yeah,
if you need
exactly.
to.
I wish
He's
that I
running. He's
also heard.
running.
I wish that was
Announced here.
Let him in. Bring him in. All right, go ahead.
that era of my life is in the past. The frequent phone calls, but that was a real thing. That was a very exciting
You
part
were
of our
frequently, Rahm was frequently calling you, is what you're saying.
just for a very short period of time toward the
Yeah.
end of my tenure for him. But yes, like it was a real thing and the constant phone calls. And I remember it being very exciting at first and then kind of overwhelming after that.
That's exactly how I've heard
Um,
him described. But
You
anyway,
yeah, and
you
that's
go
the vibe.
from you go
That's what
from
he's known for.
the intensity of Rahm Emanuel calling you, the intensity of Howard Tolman, um, and then you build basically an HR consulting slash platform company, and it still just strikes me as you went to a totally different side of the world. But you've translated now for us that actually there's a through line here to what you've
You
been
need
trying
some
to
of
do
that.
all along.
You need some of that energy too. That you need some
Yeah,
of that vibe right now. That people want that. People
they
think
want
that
the
because
intensity.
and they want the rigor and they want the matter of factness and they want the in your facedness. People think that because Holistic is an employee experience company that it's just a field of rainbows and sunshine, and we're handing out gold baskets of employee benefits all day long. It's not the case. The vast majority of the work that we do is really intense work to try and help organizations align what they're expecting from their people with what their people are expecting from them. And that's not a trivial challenge, especially because employees, because they're human beings, are very inwardly looking and self-focused, as they should be. And so they think about
Mm-hmm.
what they care about. And companies think about their own well-being, but they also obviously have to think about the well-being of their employees. But this challenge is kind of trying to align everybody on a collective mission and get them pulling with intensity in the right direction is not trivial. And we're not an organization that's like the employee is always right and the company has to capitulate to them. In fact, I would say that we probably err on the side of the employer more often than not. But if you ask me, if we get to a point where it's employees versus employer, we've actually failed already. Because our goal
Right.
is to stop that type of um, tension, to stop
Yeah.
that type of conflict from occurring, and instead to align everybody before we even get to that point, because that's where the biggest growth is going to happen. That's the conceit of holistic.
So my first encounter with holistic, I had joined Yellow. I was stepping. Well, I was actually chairman, and I wasn't stepping in as CEO. But then COVID hit, and head of HR there, Jen says, "Oh, we're basically like, oh, we're sending people home, telling them to stay home, don't come to the office. Can we work remotely? All this good stuff." And she's like, "I think we need to get holistic on the phone." I'm like, "Who?" It's just like, well, and then she explained, they're basically our outside brain to help us think about how to deal with employee issues. And if we're going into this big issue, that we're going to tell people to go remote, we don't know how long, and we don't know the impact on our business. We better start thinking about the people right away. And we got on with Tom and team, and like, okay, how do we start messaging this thing? How do we start, how did you guys navigate that period of time? Because I'm guessing you while you were dealing with it as a company on your own, you were also help companies through it.
Yeah, well, let's talk about Yellow first for a second, if we can, because I think
Sure.
Yellow, and led by you and Jen, who is an amazing
She's
partner,
terrific.
really kind of seized the opportunity of COVID pretty readily. And so, like, what I remember was that we talked about what you all wanted to accomplish in terms of communicating with your employees, and everything from the logistics of how are we going to do this and how frequently, to the like thematic, meter of what's too much and what's too little, whatever,
Yep.
right? But what we saw in the data at Yellow in particular, and I remember this it fondly, is we saw that Yellow had the season of really improved employee experience when everybody went home for COVID. And the
Yeah.
motivation for that was this unprecedented level of internal communication that was necessitated by the circumstances.
Yep.
Fine. But you all leaned into the opportunity that it presented. And then, as kind of the initial trauma of COVID subsided, you maintained a lot of the communication structures ongoing up until the time that you stopped working there and Jen stopped working there and whatever. Like, a lot of these communication principles were still in place organizationally, and probably persist at the organization, and not just Yellow, but a lot of companies
Yeah.
like had this incredible moment of clarity during COVID where they realized one of the main things that people care about is knowing where things stand and getting straight dope from the leadership of their organizations on a regular basis, and having a bilateral communication mechanism where you can share feedback and get answers to your questions.
And
And
I'll
in
tell
the
you one of the aspects of that was, unfortunately, we did have to do a staffing reduction at points, and we did multiple in the 4 years I was there, and every time people said, "Yeah, we knew this was coming," because I implemented a weekly note. I did a weekly note to the company. Execs could input to that, but it was an undertaking every week. But we were transparent. Here's what's going on with the numbers. Here's where we thought we were going to be. Here's where we're at. So when something did happen, they were like, "Yeah, we knew. We're not surprised." And it
and,
helped.
and and on some level, we're almost appreciative of the way that obviously it's regrettable. Something can be sad, and we can appreciate the way that you handled it at the same time.
That's right.
One of the crazy things that COVID revealed about the business world was that we gave employees far too little credit. And I was the
Hmm.
chief offender. I'll just say this in front of God and everybody. Pre-COVID, people used to come to us all the time and say, our employees want to work from home a couple of days. And I'd be like, don't do it, man. It'll never work. They won't be responsible. They won't get anything done. They can't work from home. They're not mature enough to do it, right? We were giving that advice to companies in late 2019 and early 2020. Then the entire world does the experiment together, and it's about a month in, and we look at each other and we're like, not only is this working, there's some elements of this that are working better than before. And now we're at a period 5+ years later where we're kind of trying to do that next evolution, which is to figure out what about the old way was really valuable that we want to bring back and persist. What about the new way is valuable? What's going to fit for our organization? How are we going to create a structure that's sustainable and lasting and valuable? That's also necessary. But on not just on work from home, but on everything, one of the things I think we realize is like, yeah, the employee is actually a lot more with it, a lot more responsible, a lot more mature, a lot more better at handling information than we thought they were. We
Hmm.
probably weren't giving them enough credit, not consciously, subconsciously. We weren't giving them enough credit. And when they were forced by circumstance to show what they could do on behalf of our organizations, they did wonderfully.
How do
So that's
you
the
what do
best.
you attribute the push to get back to office then?
Well, I do think there's some downsides to the remote first environment. I mean, this idea of like building a connection at work is very challenging. And, I mean, I could probably name 25 people that we've had work at Holistic who I never met in person. There's 3 or 4 people who work there now who I've never met in person. 2 maybe. But even still, like that's crazy to me. We have 15 people in our company. Um, and when I said I could name 25 people, that was actually a little bit of a lie because some of them I would struggle for their names. And I think part of that is that I never shared a room with them. I never I don't know how they smell, how tall they are, whatever, right? So, I think that part is a loss. This idea of like the exciting things that happens when you're in a physical space with some people is a loss. You mentioned Howard. Howard was like the original kind of like show up in a exciting place, invest yourself fully, and make some action happen. But when I think about my memories of him, it was always him interrupting me in a meeting to tell me some crazy story or some idea that he had or something that he wanted to do or something that had happened, right? That's just you actually can't interrupt me right now. Like I have my phone on do not disturb and I'm insulated in this, uh undisclosed location. Like nobody could come find me right now unless it was my wife. And so, you miss a lot of that type of stuff that I think is a challenge. I'd say the second thing is that, and we've seen this in the data, is that employee tenures are actually demonstrably shorter now than they were pre-COVID for sure, but even in the last like 20 years, like what it means to have a tenure at a company has diminished significantly. Um, and I think that's here to stay. I think this idea that you kind of get like 18 to 24 good months of somebody, that's all that you can really count on is a pretty real thing. I'm 47, so I've been working for 25 years, let's say, since like 2000. When I was first interviewing for like big boy jobs, like real jobs, people would used to say things to me like, so we look at this as like a 7-year thing. We look at this as like a 10-year commitment in interviews.
Yeah.
If one of our clients came to me and told me that they said that to an employee, I'd be like, that's the dumbest thing I ever heard of.
It's
Like you're
interesting.
just killing yourself right now if you start with that. And at the time, I was kind of laughing to people. I was like, look at my resume. I've had 8 jobs in 13 years. You think I'm looking at this as like a 7-year commitment? Like I'm obviously not. But at that time, the way that I was behaving and the way that my career was evolving was at odds with what kind of the workplace saw. That's not the case anymore. And that really got cemented in the COVID era employment universe. And it's not a stigma if you interview somebody and they've had 5 jobs in the last 8 years anymore. You don't even notice.
it's kind of interesting. I mean, at Yellow, right, we provided software for large companies to help do the recruiting, and many of those large employers had actually created a new team whose goal was to retain people after 18 months. So they were bringing in all of these recent college grads, and they had saw the data you're talking about. People were leaving here in 18 to 24 months. They're like, wow, we do better if they at least stay 36. So it's 36 months. So how do we invest in these people and work with them and actually have a team dedicated to retention beyond the 18 months? So
Yeah, man.
it
I mean,
makes sense to
onboarding
me.
is a hot thing right now for that reason.
Yes. Yes.
Like any you can walk in any business boardroom right now, obviously virtual boardroom in many
Yes.
cases, and start talking about onboarding, and people are like, "Oh man, Mike really knows his shit. Did you hear him talking about onboarding today? Like he's got his fingers on the pulse of what's going on." And but they're not wrong. Like the what you're doing in that first year is you're trying to prepare that person to give you value during this very short window where the relationship actually comes back to you. And the longer that you can perpetuate that is great. And we actually have a lot of data that shows if you can get past that 3 year hump, you can really start to have some value from folks who stay at organizations for a long time. Now, everything's pendulum, everything is, kind of going back and forth in the world that we're living in these days. And so one of the things that we're anticipating is that there is going to actually be a recoil effect in terms of the way that some of these types of things work. And we do anticipate that in the future, we are going to start to see longer tenures. We are going to start to see more
Hmm.
attention paid to things like loyalty and consistency in your role. And that'll be really interesting to see how that plays out in the modern environment.
Don't you feel that's a little bit further down? Because right now I'm seeing AI just destroy loyalty. Right, companies are like, I mean, a great example. As of when we're recording this, the day before we recorded this, Facebook just laid off 600 people in their AI team that they hired in the last year, which of course was being hired into the most important team they have. And they're like, yeah,
Right.
we decided we don't need you. Less than a year later for many of these people, right? So
Yeah.
don't you feel like we're actually getting a little backlash on that AI and the pressure from boards to reduce cost with AI is hurting that right now?
Oh, sure, for no question, right?
For now.
And I mean, we're in like the first batter of the first inning of what is a very, very long baseball game as it relates to AI.
Yep.
So like
Yep.
if everybody who thinks we're kind of figuring it out, like we're just getting started in terms of what's happening in this space. So yes, I do think that there is kind of this, and by the way, it's not just AI. It's like every technological development as it relates to work has exacerbated the capacity and amplified the capacity of organizations to be less loyal, more matter of fact, more data driven,
Yep.
more surgical, more clinical, more dispassionate about their business actions. And every piece of data that you have in essence replaces a part of your body where you said, do I think Corey's doing a good job? Do I like Mike? Do I think he is a valuable team member? That stuff doesn't even really come up anymore because we have so much evidence to indicate what's happening in an organization. We have a pretty interesting tool that we're developing right now to this end, which allows an organization to essentially get a picture at who's likely to leave in the next 6 months. So think
Okay.
about that for a second. We'll take your data and we'll run it through a tool that we've developed, and we come back to you with a list of names or employee numbers more often. And we say, these are the folks who are likely to leave in the next 6 months, and here's why. Not because they're being fired, not because they're leaving, just
Oh.
anybody whose employment is likely to end. And so this is really powerful for organizations for two reasons. One is it's jarring for them, right? Because they are confronted with this idea of this is fleeting and everybody's going to have a last day at this organization, and it may be sooner than I thought, and I need to reconcile that. But the second part, and the more important part, is that they have a capacity to do something about it to prevent it from happening if they want to.
Right.
And so after you get over the initial like shock of seeing this list and shock of
What
this
what are
exercise.
the inputs? Just to make this a little tangible. What
So we
what
look
what are
at
the input
traffic.
to this crystal ball that you're building?
It's not a crystal ball and it's not perfect. If it was perfect, I'd be doing
No,
something
I.
else.
But just for the
Um,
audience, like, so what?
so we
Just as an
take
example, what goes into the
we
algorithm?
take what we do is we take standard employee data and we run it through a tool, and we're looking for patterns that have led to circumstances where people left the organization previously. And we're trying to identify people who are experiencing that same set of circumstances now who would be vulnerable for leaving. So uh, people leave the organization because they get to a particular level and there's no advancement opportunities. At your company, a lot of the people whose employment has ended have had that characteristic. At your company, a lot of people have left the organization when their salary was inequitable with other people who were in the same role at the same level. This one manager is has seen a lot of turnover within their department, right? And then we're like, and Michelle over here has all three of these characteristics.
Mhm.
So Michelle comes through this, but for the next company over, it's three different things that emerge. So the system isn't coming in and saying, I've got my checklist of reasons why people leave, because the reasons why people leave company A and the reasons why people leave company B are specific to company A and company B. And that's one of the big bullshit things about a lot of the stuff that's going on in the technology world as it relates to HR is people think that they have figured out that crystal ball, Mike, and then they go and try and sell it to everybody. And
Yeah.
if you've been in any organization for 5 seconds, you know how unique it is and how ever changing it is. And so your solution essentially has to just look at the organization as its own ecosystem and try and identify trends with it. So that's what we do. So now getting back to Michelle, the company looks at the list of 33 people that we came up with out of their 500 people, and we say these are the people who are likely to leave within the next 6 months. And they look at it and they say 30 of these people, we love them, but we could probably replace them, or we might not even replace them, or whatever. That person's probably just going to retire, and we were expecting that. But why is Michelle on this list, man? We can't lose Michelle.
Right.
She's essential. Okay, here's why Michelle is on this list. Because of the three reasons I mentioned earlier. Now the company is in this incredibly powerful position. They have the opportunity to go and solve Michelle's problems before she's fully realized that they're challenges, certainly before those challenges have motivated her to take some sort of career action that's going to negatively affect the company for sure. Who knows how it'll work out for her. So they go and they do a stay interview with Michelle and they ask her what's going on. They identify to her that their systems have determined that she's probably paid a little bit inequitably for their position, and they're able to communicate with her about how they're going to not only increase her salary, but kind of like make good on that, which is very challenging if you've ever been involved with doing that right. They talked to her about career pathing because up to yesterday, she thought that this was it for her at the organization. But now here's this whole new thing that we can talk to you about in terms of professional development. And all of a sudden, Michelle's head is spinning. What happened?
Right. Right.
I was just sitting here. I didn't even know that these were challenges. And now my organization proactively came and solved these problems before they were occurred. But guess what else happened? Michelle is not on that list anymore.
Right.
She's not on the list.
Yeah.
And so you talk about AI and you talk about loyalty. That's the new form of loyalty. Is there a way in which I can show an extraordinary amount of care for you using the same technologies that we're all terrified of? I'm going to show an extraordinary amount of care for you and do so in a fashion that aligns with my business interests at the same time and be completely transparent about all aspects of that. That's the question I have for every business leader who's listening to this podcast right now. Can you sincerely help your employees be successful without them needing to identify for you challenges? You
Yep.
identify them on your own and proactively, and you in good faith help them be more successful and figure out a way to do that in a fashion that benefits your company, and you play your hand face up while doing it. Can you do that? If the companies that can do that, they're going to carry the day. It's a face up world, fellas. Like
Yep.
this idea of like playing your cards close to the vest, that's 2000. It's 2025. We're all playing our hands face up forever. And so figuring out a way to do that is going to be ultra powerful.
Well, I think that's a good point to end there as a challenge to existing executives and leaders is to make sure that you understand that. Tom, really appreciate it. I actually think we got to have you back because there's a few things we didn't even get into that I wanted to get into, and appreciate your time.
Yeah, it was super fun. Congrats on all that you all are doing. It's great to see both of you all in this new phase of your individual journeys as well. That's kind of a thrill for me to see that you all are keeping yourself out of trouble and producing great content.
It's getting in different trouble. That's all it is. Yeah.
That's exactly right. Exactly. So we haven't been sued over anything we've said yet. So, all right. Appreciate the time.
All right. Appreciate you all.
Thanks,
Thank
Tom.
you.
Later.